Right now, we're at the bank of Hooker Lake overlooking Mount Cook. Mount Cook is one of the most iconic and beautiful mountains, in my opinion, in all of New Zealand. It's an 8-kilometer hike to get to this point. So what we've done is we've hiked in early so we can get set up to shoot the blue hour, then the stars. The next thing that we're gonna do is stay the entire night to shoot stars and then shoot the blue hour again in the morning. We're doing this for a couple reasons. One, 8 kilometers or 5 miles is pretty far. So we didn't just want to hike in, get the shot, and hike out. We wanted to hike in, have some time to rest, and then have more time to shoot the morning as well. The main reason for getting here early is to get a balanced nightscape shot. And what I mean by balanced is I mean capturing the peak of the blue hour along with the night sky and the stars. So remember back when we just had that tree and we had the stars behind the tree? The tree was actually lit by the town. There was plenty of ambient light from the lights from the little town of Tekapo. But here we're out in the middle of nowhere and we're 8 kilometers away from a tiny little village. So there is no ambient light around. So what I want to do is capture that really beautiful blue hour or even different parts of the blue hour and use it to blend with the night sky, because if I just came here at night, pointed the camera at the sky, I wouldn't see anything but blackness and then stars. So I wouldn't see any of the mountains, any of the water, or any of this beautiful rocky foreground and lake that I have in front of me. You may be familiar with some of the other shots that I've gotten, some of the other nightscapes. You may notice that there's always a ton of detail in the foreground. That's because I always use a blending technique. I want to make sure to have the best foreground shot at the lowest ISO, as sharp and beautiful as possible, that I can use to blend with the night sky. While I did say that there's no ambient light here, I can see the moon here off in this direction, and the moon's still pretty high up in the sky, but I think it's not gonna set in time for the blue hour. And the moon's actually going down, so it's gonna be setting at some point tonight. So I anticipate there may be some issues or there may be some advantages. I could maybe use the moonlight to my advantage, or alternatively, the moon could actually wash out the stars. I'm not exactly sure as of yet. That's the great thing about having 2 chances at this. We're staying out here all night, so I can shoot after sunset, I can shoot the blue hour and the stars, and I can shoot the blue hour again before sunrise. So that's 2 whole chances to get it right. And the nice thing is I have the moon. It could be good, but I'm anticipating it's gonna cause problems. The other thing is there are some clouds over there on the mountain that could cause some issues as well. So I'm hoping between the late blue hour and the early blue hour the next day that I have enough elements to blend a really nice shot. At nighttime, it would be pitch black. So even if I did a ridiculously long exposure at night, it still wouldn't look right. Black is black, and no light means there's no light. So it would take a tremendously long period of time to just pick up whatever light was left, and the detail would still be dark, and a lot of the blacks would just turn to shades of gray. If I use the blue hour instead, there's enough ambient light in the sky where I can still see all those details and separate the colors. So it looks like a really beautiful version of the scene, while a static night shot would just look like a dark foreground with a night sky. It's easy to just come out at night, point the camera at the sky, and get a shot of the night sky without ever thinking about your foreground. But if you really want those great portfolio shots, you need to think about the foreground. So for this shot, I've gotten here early and I've really thought about how these rocks play in the foreground and lead into the shape of the mountain. So at that point, when I add the night sky to this frame, it's gonna complement the foreground. So the night, the stars, and that blue hour, everything's gonna complement itself as a unified composition. We've blended shots together for this entire tutorial, but now it's getting a little bit complicated because we're using different extremes. We have the extreme of a blue hour to the extreme of a night sky. When we were just blending sunset and blue hour together, the gap was really minimal. We're talking maybe 15, 20 minutes. Now we're talking about the potential of hours. So the difference in light is gonna change dramatically from full dark to blue hour. So it's going to be a little bit more tricky in post to balance everything. But if we can balance everything right, we have the potential to have something truly unique and very beautiful. For this shot in particular, I've decided to set up 2 cameras based on a very similar composition, but the difference is I have a camera set very low, angled up, where I make the night sky the predominant feature. And I have this camera here pointed down a little bit to make the foreground the dominant feature. Now, I'm not sure how everything's gonna turn out in the end, so this gives me the ability to pick and choose the one that I like best after I review everything in post. Now, I know most of you probably only have one camera, but you might be traveling with a backup camera as well. If you're gonna invest the time to hike 5 miles in, camp an entire night, and 5 miles out, set up as many cameras as possible, because the last thing you want to do is have to repeat this a second time. So things are all set up. I'm going to adjust these compositions a little bit until I'm really confident that it's exactly what I want. Once that happens, I'm going to wait for the blue hour to approach, and then I'm going to start capturing that perfect amount of ambient light. A beautiful blue hour is just starting, so this is what I've been waiting for. This is what I want to use to blend with the night sky. So right now what I'm going to do is concentrate on capturing the best possible blue hour I can. Right now there's still a little bit of light from the moon on the side of the mountain, so I have to expose very carefully for both. So I'm still using in-camera bracketing. I'm not using 5 exposure bracketing. I'm actually just using 2 exposures, one under and then one normal exposure. I'm still shooting at the lowest ISO possible. I think right now I'm using ISO 64 at f8. As it starts to get a little bit more dark, I'm going to start bringing the ISO up to about 200, and then when it gets a little bit darker than that, I'm going to start bringing down f8 to maybe f5, 6, and then f4. Once it gets darker than that, it's almost time to shoot stars. So the hope for this is that I'm able to capture a beautiful near dark blue hour at the best settings possible. That's the lowest ISO and the best, sharpest f-stop. The reason being is I want everything to be crisp and clean. The only thing that I want to have noise in it, which I'll be able to clean as well, is the night sky. So this is going to produce the cleanest, best image overall. I've talked a little bit about capturing stars around the new moon. Well, this is much later, and now we have about a half moon. But in this situation, I'm getting this beautiful moonlight on the tip of the mountain. It looks incredible, so I'm hoping to use that to my advantage in the final blend. Take a look at these 2 shots. Take a look at this early blue hour shot. It looks pretty good, but I really wanted it to be a little bit darker before I settled on my final shot. But now take a look at this shot. This is at the blue hour point that I really wanted to capture, but take a look at the muddy color on the left of the frame. That's actually the moon just about to pass behind the mountains. The moon's actually getting ready to set. So I'm really disappointed that that moon is causing that problem in the water. So at this point, I'm not really sure if I'm going to be able to get the blue hour shot that I want, but I'm going to try anyway. And then I'm going to capture the night sky and all the stars, wait for the sun to start coming up where I get the next blue hour, the AM blue hour, and I'm going to hope that that one gives me the perfect shot that I want. Right now, the moon is in a very problematic area because it's wrecking not only my shot, but the night sky as well. When you have a moon that's half to full, it has so much light, and in this case, so much light that it's illuminating the mountainscape in the background, but it's also washing out the stars. So you're never gonna get as many stars as you would with a moonless sky or when you're shooting at a new moon. But the moon is also setting, so I think in a few hours, the moon's gonna be down all the way and I'm gonna be able to see every star in the sky. It's about midnight now, and the moon was a problem a few hours before, but now it's starting to set behind the mountain. While there still are clouds on the left side of the frame, they're no longer being backlit by the moon. All the while waiting for the moon to set, I've been snapping frames, and I think I got a pretty cool foreground with the illumination on the cloud with some stars behind it, so I'm hoping that I can make a good image out of that itself. But what I'm really hoping for now that the moon has set all the way, that the sky's dark enough to start focusing just on the stars. It is rounding midnight, so I could stay out here for another couple hours, pressing the camera shutter every 5 minutes to see if those clouds dissipate, but I'd rather just set it to auto mode, consecutive 30-second exposures, and get a couple hours of sleep. I think that's a better option. Both cameras have the same settings. This camera has the 16 to 35 at f4. The other camera has the 14 to 24, which is an f2.8, but since I still have a little bit of moonlight, I have it cranked up to f4, which is gonna give me a better image overall. And all the settings are both set to 1600 ISO and 30-second exposures. I have my trigger set, so when I press this button and lock it down on both cameras, it's gonna shoot consecutively until the battery dies. All right, so it's a very early AM blue hour now. We've all been out here all night long. I don't think any of us got much sleep at all. It got really windy, 40-mile-an-hour wind started coming through. Felt like it was gonna blow the tents over. In fact, a couple of the cameras that we had set up doing time lapses throughout the night actually blew over from the force of the wind, so it was pretty wild. The waves kicked up. My cameras got wet because the waves actually were crashing over these rocks that I'm using as a foreground element. So it was actually a pretty crazy night. But throughout the night, I was able to capture some different night sky images, and now this morning's blue hour looks completely different. There are no clouds, it's crystal clear, and everything looks beautiful. I also have a nice mirrored reflection. Last night I didn't have that because of the wind, but I think the wind is clocked around, so now I'm getting this nice reflection to work with. At this point, I've shot so much. I shot the sunset blue hour, I shot all through the night, tons of star images, and now I've shot this morning blue hour all the way through as well. So I have so many different images. It's really hard to tell what everything looks like on the back of that LCD. So at this point, the best thing to do is get everything back into Photoshop, take a look at what's gonna blend the best, and then work from there. Welcome back to the post-processing studio, everybody. This is a really exciting lesson. When you watch the video portion, the in-camera portion, we had hiked 5 miles in to Mount Cook, set up 2 cameras, waited all night, and at the end of it, I had shot so much that I wasn't really sure what was gonna work and what wasn't gonna work. I didn't talk too much about it on camera, but I tried to shoot star trails throughout the night and put something together, but I had this heavy cloud. This cloud kept moving in, destroyed any chances of that, which isn't a problem, but I think this was one of those scenes where I had some intentions of what I wanted, but I really wanted to wait and see and just put myself in the right position to be able to capture everything that I may need and then be able to decide later. And thankfully, everything worked out really well. And I have a great lesson to show you guys here because the initial intention was to be able to blend a blue hour shot, an early blue hour, with a starscape. And I knew the moon was going to be an issue, but I was hoping that it would be an advantage. And in this case, the blue hour from nighttime when we got there didn't look as good as the one from the morning. So we're actually going to do a really cool moonlit mountainscape, and then we're going to blend a morning shot in with it. So it's actually, you know, the beginning of night with beginning of morning. So it's a long time stretch, but we have this great reflection, this really cool stars, and I've given you guys some options too to play around on your own here and create your own version of this scene too. So let's go ahead and get started and I'll explain what I have inside of Capture One. So here we go. I'm giving you guys 4 files here. Now this one here, you can actually see the moon up on the left. Now ignore the white balance, I was shooting in auto so it made it very cold, but really look at the water here. I mean the water, it's very flat, there's one little piece of ice back there, I don't see any reflections. Check out the blue hour from the morning. Now remember, I left these cameras in the same position all night long. So the morning blue hour and the nighttime blue hour actually match up. But if you see this one here, we haven't done any color correction yet, you can see how nice it is. We actually see the reflection, we have some more ice, everything like that. It's a little bit more cloudless. And then what I'm also giving you guys are 2 more files here. Now there are 2 starscapes where we have the moon light actually illuminating this rim of the cloud here and then casting on the mountain, which is very beautiful. So this is a 100% win scenario as far as the moon goes and a starscape. I've also given you 2 options. Check this out. We have some comets, there are comets or shooting stars or streaks. Now I rather like this one, and this is what I'm going to be working on, but I gave you guys an option too. So here's one with just a small streak without that really light streak there. So what I encourage you guys to do These are interchangeable. You can basically use either one to do the blend. The reason I'm picking this one is not just because of this streak and this streak, but check out the light on the tip of the mountain. Notice how it's illuminated here? It's gone here. Now also, check out the light on the tip of the mountain here, and check out the light on the highlight here. This will come into play a little bit later. It looks like it matches. So there's a highlight here, highlight here, highlight here. It's pretty nice. So what we're going to have to do here, we're going to take this file, and we're going to blend it with this file. But the first thing is one, you notice the white balance of this one is much warmer than the white balance of this one. This is very dark. This is also very dark. We're going to have to do some surgery here in Capture One. Before we get into the color correction of this scene, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the distortion. Right now we have the distortion set to 100% correction. Let's go ahead and change the fall off here for the light. I'm going to leave the sharpening alone, but what I want to do now that I have this set, I'm going to right click, I'm going to copy my adjustments, and I'm going to paste them to all of these files. So right now I'm going to have that same distortion removal and everything else. The next step is I want to bring this white balance a little bit closer together with this other one. So what I'm going to do first is go here to the colors, and we're going to pull this down, we're going to cool it down a little bit, and I'm going to change this to around 6600, which is definitely going to be a little bit cooler than the one before. So now it looks more like a cool night sky. Next thing I'm going to do is go here and adjust the shadows just a little bit. We're going to pull those out so we can change the brightness here. Let's pick something right around 30, and we can change the contrast later in Photoshop, but really I just want to pull out the detail of the mountain and some of the details here so we have a good blending point to start with. Now with that set that way, I'm going to go ahead and right click. I'm going to go ahead and export the variants into Photoshop. Exporting, select all, copy, close, and I'm going to paste it into my original result. I'm going to clear this notification here just so it doesn't bounce up and down the whole time. And the next thing we're going to do now, we have our original, we have our adjusted one. Now we're going to go back into Capture One, and we're going to talk about the adjustment for this guy here. So we've gotten this one ready. Now it's time to make some adjustments to this to bring it back to a neutral tone. So the first thing that I want to do is go to the colors, the white balance, and I'm just going to warm it up actually just a little bit more to match. So we're going to do something, let's split it at 8700-ish, and I think I'm going to have to do a tint. It's looking a little magenta, so let's go ahead and do something maybe around -5 here just to neutralize it. Now basically that tint towards green will neutralize it, make the browns look brown. We don't want any magenta cast. Now, next thing I want to do with that is go here and make some basic adjustments. So the same thing, just like last time, I'm going to go ahead and bring the shadows up, but this case it's a little bit brighter already, so I may only want to go to about 20, and I'm going to kind of take a look at the difference of these and see if they're close. And you can see that they're off just a little bit. This one's a little bit darker. Actually, you know what? They look pretty good, pretty close. Let's go ahead and go with that. I'm going to right-click, export, variants. Let's go ahead and bring this one in too. Copy, close, paste on top. Good time to name everything. Original raw. Then we have our night shot and our morning shot. All right, let's see what we got here. We have the original raw. We'll go ahead and ignore that now. We have the night shot and we have the morning shot. So what I'm going to have to do is blend part of the morning shot into the night shot. So I'm going to do that by creating a mask very quickly using the gradient tool. And I'm basically just going to draw from about here to here first. So we're just going to create a nice soft gradient that blends that water in. And that's going to be the base of what we're going to do. But now what I'm going to do is zoom in a little bit. And I'm going to blend a little bit more in. So see this moon shadow here? What I actually want to do, and I'll do that with a very soft brush and a very light flow, is I'm going to start to paint some of the blue hour, the morning blue hour, back into the scene here just to kind of get rid of some of that shadow. So we're just going to kind of do a nice blend. I'm also going to make sure that I blend all of this ice in so there's none of the water missing in the scene. And I can just do this little by little. And since the camera stayed in the same place, there's not going to really be any shift. Here too, you can see I had a brighter version in the morning that I can actually kind of go in and add some more detail back to this mountain. And that's a little bit too much. So I want to be very careful about the detail that I put in here. Just a tiny little bit, maybe just to pick up some of those highlights that we got. Remember, at the blue hour at nighttime, the sun was over here illuminating the mountain along with the moon. In the morning, it was over here illuminating this side, so we get some nice natural light over here on this side of the mountain. So we can use that to our advantage in this blend. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. I used the gradient to make sure we got all of the water here, but what I want to do is just go ahead and check my quick mask mode, and that looks pretty good. I may want to just blend a little tiny bit more of this just to unify it, just a little bit. And that's done a few things. It's softened that shadow a little bit and kind of unified our blend. All right, so we've basically gone from here to here, and that's actually starting to look pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and take this entire thing, we're going to put it into a folder, and I'm going to call that folder, as usual, we'll call that blend. What I want to do now is I want to go ahead and create a duplicate of this, get it on its own layer. I'm not going to use Nik Collection, but I'm actually going to, once again, I'm going to use the Adobe Camera Raw filter. And I'm also going to make sure that our Capture One notification doesn't get in our way again. So with that selected, layer 1, I'm going to go up here to Camera Raw filter. Another thing too is if, unlike Nik Collection, when you apply it to a layer, it makes a duplicate layer for you. Camera Raw filter will not. It will just apply it to whatever layer you have selected. So make sure that it's the one you want to select and apply to. We'll go ahead and go to Camera Raw filter. What I want to do is bring the shadows up a little bit here, and this is pretty powerful. And the other thing that I want to do is bring down, and I'm just going to try to keep these as even numbers as possible, pull the whites down just a hair, so maybe -30. You can see as I start to pull the whites down, it's actually taking the highlight in the sky from the moon down a little bit, and it's actually killing this off, which is really nice. So I'm just going to do that. Maybe something subtle around, keep it +30, -30, and then now I want to add a little bit of contrast in, so maybe 20% contrast. And since we're starting to lose some of this, let's add a little bit of vibrance. So vibrance maybe around 10, and that's just going to kind of bring some of that color saturation back up just a little bit, and I'll apply this. So you can see the before and the after. We're getting some of that kick back in the image. We haven't done too much to damage it because we do have a lot of noise in the sky here. I'm going to go ahead and rename this. We'll just call it ACR filter. Let's go ahead and start adding a little bit of punch to this image by going to Nik Collection Color Efex Pro. We're going to keep it subtle, but we're still going to add some to it. All right, here we go. Let's go ahead and start with Pro Contrast. Now check this out. Correct color contrast is going to pull a little bit of the saturation out of the sky, which is great. But it's also going to start to add a little bit of warmth back into the image to pull the cool tone out a little bit. So I'm actually going to take advantage of that a little bit. So we're going to maybe do 20% here. Contrast is going to start brightening it up. So let's go ahead and brighten up the entire image a little bit. And then we know our favorite dynamic contrast is just going to add a little bit more punch to the image. So we have 20, 10, 20. I'm going to add another filter, and let's see, what do we want to use? Let's go with contrast color range. So again, we'll turn all this all the way down. Reset it because it gets a little bit unmanageable, but you can see that we're actually popping out some of the detail here in the mountain. If I go all the way to the right, you can see it's ridiculous. Now I mitigated some of the blue cast here. I really like what this is doing in the mountain with the color contrast, so let's just go ahead and add about 40. The cool thing is by mitigating some of the blue in the Pro, we can get the blue back, but then we can also get the details on the mountain that we want from this plugin. Let's go ahead and apply the result. Nice, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and name that. Call it CEP Contrast and ColorCon. That looks good. We'll go back up to filter. Now it's time to get rid of some of the noise. Let's go ahead and go Nik Collection, Define. All right, so we have a pretty good result before and after. I'm not going to do a custom result, but you can see we're getting rid of a little bit of that crunchiness in the noise. I'm going to reduce it a lot more though. Maybe let's try again here with the 150%. And let's see what we get. That's looking much better. We're starting to remove a lot of that noise. Let's move the navigator down all the way to the bottom here. Let's see how our lighter stars are holding up. That looks pretty good. And let's go all the way down here to, there is still some noise with this scene here in the water, and we're looking at the water, noise, and nearly noise-free. That's much better. Let's go ahead and apply. All right, that's looking good, but what we need to do is make that selective. I'm going to hit Option, hold Option, click on the mask so it's black. I'm going to do a 100% flow, white brush. I'm going to show my quick mask here, and I'm actually just going to start painting in the area that I want. So this whole area here, and again, I'm using the larger Wacom tablet, so the brush strokes are really fun to do with this tablet. It's perfect for this screen size, makes this much easier. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and remove some from the water as well. This, I'm going to use about a 20% flow, and I'm actually just going to start painting out some of the water. I want to leave all the sharpness in the mountains and most of the sharpness in the rocks. I want those rocks to have detail. So this forward exposure here for the water was f5.6, I believe, to get a 30-second exposure in the morning. It was still pretty dark. So I managed to get something that was much sharper overall than f4 or f2.8 for the night sky. So what I want to do is kind of keep some of that intact, but I want to get rid of some of the noise from the water as well. So I'm just going to do a nice sort of custom painted mask. It just works so well with the stylus. We'll leave a little bit around these edges and keep that intact. Fix a little bit more of that up. That looks perfect. We want all the cloud to be noise-free. Noise-free. Sharp mountains, soft sky, soft water. Perfect. That looks good with Define. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and get this saving in the background just in case. What I want to do is start talking about custom color corrections here. So we've been using a lot of different luminosity masks. We've been using mid-tone masks, shadow and highlight masks, but we've really been focusing a lot with the cityscape stuff. You guys remember, we're really doing a lot to protect highlights. And specifically, we're doing a lot, remember, from Singapore, Hong Kong, using a luminosity mask and an additional underexposed shot to basically be able to control the light so that nothing's blown out. Well, I want to do something a little bit different here. I want to use just the shadows. So I love the highlights. Highlights are great. But what I want to do is I want to pull the shadows up a little bit and make sort of a more poppy, crisp image. So what I'm going to do in the channels is I'm going to select the RGB channel here, and I'm going to create a mask. And remember, again, this is, by this time we've done so many files together, this should be a review. If I invert it, right now it's a selection for the highlights, but if I invert it, it's going to be a selection for the shadows. Well, you guys remember that if I were to load this as a selection and invert it with itself and create another mask, then I get a super highlights map. That should be a review. So what I can do here, and this is something we haven't done yet, if I invert this mask, so now it's a shadow mask, load it as a selection and invert it on itself, guess what? I'm going to end up with a super shadows. If I do that again, load it and invert it with itself, I'm going to end up with an even more detailed shadow map. So this is kind of cool. So now I'm starting to cut out the highlights, I've cut out the clouds, and now with something like this, I can go ahead and throw these away. I don't need those. And this mask right here, I can go ahead and clamp it. And if I start to clamp these values here, you can see that I can get rid of the sky altogether. And I can just focus on some of these darker areas of the image. I don't even have to go that intense, just something like this. Looks pretty good. I mean, well, I guess I say pretty good, but it is a garbage mask. But it is just accounting for the shadows. Now that I have that, I can say, well, you know what? I want to color correct a lot of the water. So let's go ahead and paint this part back in. This looks pretty good. I've gotten most of the edge here. Let's go ahead and say, well, I don't want any of the sky. That looks pretty nice. And now I'm just basically going to be controlling the shadows of the image. So with this in mind, I can select this new garbage mask that I've created out of Luminosity channel, and I can create a curves. Since I've created this super shadow map here, as I start to clamp it, you're going to see that it's going to change the shadows and it's going to leave the highlights intact. So it gives me the ability to basically take this pretty far. I can go right past this quarter tone here, and you can see this edge right here on my histogram. That's basically where my highlights stop. So if I wanted this to be, very bright, I could take it all the way, but I'm not going to take it all the way. I'm going to go right to about there until it visually looks like that water and the mountain is bright enough. And I like that. Now what's happened here, since I've brought shadows closer to midtones and sort of midtones closer to highlights, I've lost some of the contrast. So I'm going to add contrast. By just doing brightness and contrast this way, I'm going to just add 15% contrast back to the image. And I'm going to link it to this layer by holding Option and clicking so that it exists inside of this selection that I've already made. And again, I can make some small adjustments until I like exactly how that looks. And we're going to go ahead and call this, I'll call it Super Shadows. Perfect. Next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and turn this color correction off. And I'm going to go back into the channels, and I'm going to go ahead and delete Alpha 3. We don't need these. They add extra size to the file we don't need. So I'm going to create another midtones mask. So we've done this before. I'm going to create this, duplicate this one, and invert it. Select all, and subtract both of these from each other. It's going to tell me that it doesn't know. You can't see anything, and that's fine. And I'm going to go right here. I'll turn this back on, create another curves. And now this is just going to be my midtones contrast. So now I can create a really nice contrast here in the image just by creating this nice S-curve. We'll just adjust it until I like exactly how it looks. And instead of doing an S-curve with that locked in, you can actually do this as well. This is definitely acceptable as far as tonality goes too. So I like something just like that. We'll just turn it off and on to make sure, yeah, that is looking pretty good. Now in the midtones, I might also want to mitigate some of the blue, and you can see if I start to slide this over, I'll get rid of some of that blue. I feel it's a little saturated, so I'll just go ahead and take some of the blue out of the midtones here, just a little bit. That's perfect. Speaking of blues, let's go ahead and discuss some of this ice back here. So notice these icebergs. It's blue ice. It's blue and white, but it's also reflecting. So ice is very interesting. It's just like water. It's super reflective. It's going to pick up the sky. It's going to pick up any colors around it. But I think it just looks a little bit too blue. So what I'm going to do is create a hue saturation layer in the blues here. And I'm going to turn the lightness up on the blues. Somewhere around 30, just like that. That looks perfect. I'm going to black this whole thing out. And I'm actually just going to go ahead and brush in. I'll use my brackets here. I'll zoom in. We have to zoom way in on this. And I am going to use a flow of about 40. And I'm just going to start to sort of paint out the blue on that ice. Some of this ice back here, I'm going to use a lighter brush. I'm just going to take some of the blue out. I like the blue, but I don't like too much of it. In the reflection as well, we have to be very careful about that. Let's zoom out. This one looks like a blue hunk of ice. So I'm just going to take a little bit of it out in certain areas just so it gives it a different tone than some of the rest of the blues in the image. Go ahead and move over. This one here, let's go ahead and make that a white piece of ice. And I'm not just doing that to mitigate the reflection. I'm doing that to add some character to the image and some variance in the tonality. Remember, anytime that something reflects itself, you have to make sure that you remove some of that as well. So we'll go here, do the same thing. Down here in the mountain, remove some of that blue. Let's see what else we have. That looks pretty good. While we're at it, let's go ahead and do the same thing with these rocks. Let's pull some of the blue out of the rocks here. Not all of it, just enough. Maybe a little bit of blue over here in the shadows. There's some extra blue in this mountain. That'll help bring the greens back out a little bit. And this is just sort of a surgical removal of some of the blues, just to get rid of any of the reflective elements. And it's also going to help these rocks sort of pop out on their own here. Pretty easy stuff. And we have one more guy back here. It is way too blue. So let's just go ahead and take that down just a hair. And some of the blue off this bank. Everything's starting to look pretty good now. I want to do some additional color corrections here. So remember, this was our blue. I'll just do blue minus, like it got a bad grade in blue. And we can see it actually makes a big difference here. You know what? While we're at it, let's just go ahead and clean up our own masking here. Let's get rid of some of that. I love doing that. It's all done to taste. We can see that we've selected most of these rocks. We do a better job overall of just cleaning some of that up. With the quick mask enabled here, it kind of helps us see what's actually going on. But again, real easy with the Wacom stylus. And again, this is all done to taste. If you guys want to remove some blue, at this point, this stage in the game, we've worked on so many files together, feel free to take it to your own level as well. So with everything enabled here again, what I want to do is I'm turning off these layers here, these luminance layers, I'll go ahead and turn that one back on here. Because when I do a luminosity mask, anything that's turned on, remember, will show up in the channels. So what I really want to do is just basically keep it as clean as possible, as close to the original as possible. I don't want the other color corrections and enhancements to affect the base tone that I'm trying to capture. So what I want to do now, we've already had this one, the shadows. What I want to do now is just go ahead and get the shadows on its own mask here, because what I did with the super shadows, I feel like we could still potentially brighten everything up a little bit more. So if I bring in the curves here, you can see my shadows. You can see we're still missing some vibrance. Right about here, we're missing data. So if I just pull this over a little bit, it's going to add brightness to the entire scene. And I'm just going to do that a little bit. Some people might take it all the way to the edge of this, but I still want to leave a little bit of mystery and intrigue by leaving everything just a little bit dark. But I just want to pick up the entire image without affecting the highlights, just to get a little bit more brightness overall. With that in mind, I want to do one more thing. I'm going to add a basic curves here. So everything that I've done has been in the shadows, but what I want to do, I really want to focus. See this highlight from the sky? See this highlight here? This is the area that I want to color correct. I love the tones here in the shadows of the reflection, but I want to pull this up a little bit. Remember, with the curves here, I'm probably going to want to just lock it to a certain area. So I don't want to adjust this, the darks. So what I can do is actually lock the darks down, and then I can ramp this up, just like this. And you see how the water's getting more contrast now? I don't want to add any darkness to it, but I want to add some contrast to the water. So you guys see how that's picking that right up there and making it look pretty good? That's awesome. That's exactly what I want. But still a little too much. Well, let's just ramp that just a little bit less. And here's what I'm going to do now with a gradient. We'll just select the gradient tool here. I'm actually going to have that fade from here to here. So now we get some more highlights on the water itself. Oh, at this stage, it's really up to you guys where you want to take it next. Here, I'm very happy with the way this image works, but we can add some sharpening too. And if we're going to add sharpening, my recommendation is to add sharpening from the corrected layer, not the noise-free layer, because the noise-free layer took away some of those details. So if we create a high-pass filter, we can do that with this layer here, not the define on top. So if I go ahead and duplicate that, I'll go up to filter and we'll see if we can get a high-pass filter to look okay on this mountain with 3. And you can see as a side effect, which is really nice, we've already put define on top. We don't have anywhere where it's going to sharpen the water or sharpen the sky. It's just going to sharpen the rocks and the mountain. And I'll go ahead and set this to overlay and we'll take a look at what it does. Let's zoom in a little bit on the mountain so we have the before and after, and that's really popping out some of that razor sharp detail, and it's looking pretty good. So what I want to do though is I want to check the rocks. I want to make sure as well that the rocks are getting some more detail. Just a little bit of detail. That's pretty nice. Not bad. And what I'm going to do though, just to protect these edges a little bit, I'm going to add a mask, and what I'm going to do is just black it out, just so I don't end up with any extra halos. Again, this is so sensitive because we're shooting the night sky, and this is already a little bit grainy. I really want to make sure that nothing that's dark or nothing that was exposed at the f2.8 has too much sharpening applied to it. So we want to be really, really careful about that. But the rocks here, probably a really good thing to have sharp, and everything else like that. So that's actually looking pretty good. Now, at this point, we've done quite a bit. We've done quite a bit to this image. So let's go ahead and take a look at where we started, and just to get a base around what we've actually done. So here's our original image. It's going to be a big shock from the final image. It's a dark shot. It's pretty nice. Has some intrigue. Not much going on in the foreground, not much going on in the water. When we started to add the night shot, just the corrections to the night shot, you can see that we lost the contrast. We brought up those values. This was the big step. And this was the step that I wasn't sure in shooting, but it turned out that the morning shot worked out best. So we were actually able to take, by leaving the cameras all night, sleeping, waking up, and shooting some more, we were able to take this to this, which is a huge difference. This is actually what I envisioned for the scene. Best case scenario, we had a little bit of ice. Best case scenario, we had a perfect mirrored reflection, rocky foreground interest, basically everything that makes a beautiful shot, beautiful mountain, and a beautiful night sky. From there, we were able to take it all the way to this. So you can see we've gone from the very basic, and I'll go to this corrected one, it's the very mundane but still nice image, to something that is completely unique and extraordinary. And also keep in mind that by blending this, we've created a super moment that can't be matched. So if somebody just came out here while we were out there, started shooting the night sky, tried to correct something that was just like this, they'd end up with an okay image, but they wouldn't end up with an image that was like this, that had everything going for it and the best parts of every scenario and every moment of time together. That wraps things up for this lesson at Mount Cook. Next time we're going to be at the Church of the Good Shepherd, where I'm going to show you guys how to create one of the most iconic shots I have in my portfolio.